particular, because children are more vulnerable, may die from these factors. They may not be able to send their children to school and educate their children, and basically they're not able to lead a life that is the kind of life that we would think is a minimally decent life with the kind of dignity that we think human beings ought to be able to have. Well, there are many results of that. It's obviously a bad thing in itself that there should be so many people living impoverished lives like that. But one very concrete way of looking at the results of that is that there are a lot of people dying preventable deaths because they're impoverished. Because, as I said, they're not well nourished, they don't have safe drinking water or sanitation, they can't even get the most minimal health care. So how many people are dying? There are various estimates around, but on the latest UNICEF estimate that I've seen, it was something a little over 8 million children dying every year from avoidable poverty-related causes. So if you think about 8 million a year, we're talking about something like 22,000 a day. You can think about how many children are dying simply while I'm giving this short talk. And that's one side of the picture. Then the other side of the picture, of course, is that there are also a lot of people in the world who are affluent that by historical standards is almost unprecedented, at least unprecedented to happen on a large scale. I mean, maybe a couple of centuries ago there were a small number of elite aristocrats in Europe who were affluent. But even they, of course, did not have a lot of the things that we take for granted, like telephones or air conditioning or ways of escaping the cold and gloom of winter by flying to the south for a holiday, any of those things. So we really are affluent in a way that people have never been before, and on quite a large scale, again at least a billion or so. And we spend money on things that in no way are necessities. We do that every day, and you think, well, I'm not really rich, I don't live in luxury, I don't have a flash car, I maybe say I can't even afford to fly down to the Mediterranean in winter for a sunny break. But can you afford to go to a cafe and buy coffee, or can you afford to buy a bottle of water when the water that comes out of the tap is safe to drink? If you think Oxford water doesn't taste all that great, if you can afford those things, you've got money to spend on things that clearly are not necessities. They are luxuries, they are frivolities, even some of them, if you like. So we have that condition prevailing, to say, for around another billion or so people. And given that you're one of that group, and I think I can confidently say that all of us in the room are in that group, then we have it in our power to save the lives of 1 or 5 or 10 or maybe over a lifetime hundreds or 1,000 or more of these children and adults for that matter too, who will otherwise die because of their poverty. We have the means to do that because fortunately, we have a number of organisations that are working to reduce poverty and to provide some of those things that, as I said, people are lacking. We have organised, in fact, one of them was, one of the most famous, of course, was founded in this city. It still has its offices here, Oxfam, which has been doing that since the 1940s. And there are others as well that are doing that. Some are more effective than others. Can come to that, or maybe Toby Ord is going to speak about that. Organisations that are effective in doing that. What they can do is limited to the resources they have, and that's related to the donations that they receive. So by donating to those organisations, by taking some of that money we spend on some of those luxuries that I mentioned, and donating to those organisations, we can support projects that reduce the loss of life, the sort that I mentioned. And I think, something we can discuss in more detail, but I think it's reasonable to say that for donations that we can afford, we can also save a child's life. So let's go back then to the let's go back to the situation of the child in the pond and the judgment that we reach about that. If you think that it's not just not nice, but seriously wrong to walk past the child because you don't want to ruin your expensive shoes, why isn't it seriously wrong to buy a pair of expensive shoes in the first place if you could make do with your existing number of shoes, or maybe you could buy some quite basic, inexpensive shoes and donate the rest of the money to Oxfam or one of those other organisations, and use that to work towards saving a child's life. Depending how expensive the shoes you buy are, you might not be able to be confident that just that is going to be enough. Although certainly if you are a high-end fashion buyer, spending hundreds of pounds on a pair of shoes, as some people do, then probably we are talking about the kind of sum that can save a child's life. If you're at the lower end, it might take a little longer for you to accumulate enough by saving some of those purchases, but you certainly can give enough to save a child's life. And if you don't do that, then how are you different from the person who walked past the pond to save the shoes? I would say, let me answer my own question. I would say you may be different emotionally. You may have a different psychology, but I don't think you're different ethically. So allow me to elaborate on what I mean by that. You may be different psychologically because the person who walks past the pond and sees the child in front of them has to actually turn away from a child who he can see as an identifiable individual in a situation in which he knows that if he doesn't rescue that child, it's highly likely that the child will drown. Not certain, because you don't know that the child is going to drown. Maybe there's somebody else you can't see hiding behind a bush or something who's going to rush out at the last moment and save the child. But it looks like, as I said, it's you and the child. All you have to do is do that yourself, sort of hands-on personal rescue in that situation, and then you solve the problem. So all of those factors mean that somebody who turns away from that individual child, knowing that, has a particular kind of psychology or emotional makeup that we might think of as deficient, as lacking something that we hope human beings have, that readiness to respond to the help right here. Whereas when I said to you that you could give money to Oxfam, I was not able to say to you, look, here's this child. It wasn't as if I could use a PowerPoint and put a photo up on the screen and say, here's this child. This is her name, this is how old she is. She's going to die quite soon unless one of you puts your hand up and says, I'm going to give £100 to Oxfam to save this child. I think probably if that were the situation, and if I could really convince you that that was the situation, if you really believe, then a lot of hands will go up quickly. But I can't show you a particular child. You don't know which the particular child is that you're going to help. The other factor is that you're not alone. You might say, well, yes, there are children, but why is it up to me to save them? There's lots of other people who are just as well off, much better off, in fact, some of them, than I am. Why shouldn't they be saved? And that also is psychologically relevant, I think, to our readiness to help. We're actually a kind of, we often talk of people being like sheep in a negative way, but it's true that we tend to follow others or influenced by examples, and if we see that other people are not giving, we are less likely to give. So that's the psychological aspects of it. But try to think about it ethically, because ethics isn't just a matter of psychology and feelings. Ethics is also a matter of using our intellectual and critical abilities to think about our situation. And if you do that, and you compare the situation I just described with our situation vis-a-vis the global poor and the situation of the child in the pond,